linked in the agenda. Those minutes were linked in the agenda. Folks have comments on the minutes.
Yeah, hey, TJ and everybody, this is Jared. I just noticed a couple of things. One is on the subcommittee members present. I believe that Andrea Wright is listed twice, unless there's an Andrew Wright who I don't know about. I think that that's a name to delete from the subcommittee members. And then the other thing is on the first recorded action on the vote. My last name is not included as among the ayes, and it should be.
Okay, Jared, I'm editing. I have that document open, and I'll take Andrew, whoever that person is, off and add you to the list of ayes. Thank you.
Thank you, Jared.
There's a very minor typo that I'm going to chat to you, Megan.
Okay.
Not substantive.
Oh yeah, I got that one. Thank you.
And what vote was that? Or an aye?
That was the first one about the updated transportation policy.
Yep.
Thanks for that, Jared. Thanks for the close read of the minutes. Appreciate that. Okay, so if there's no other discussion on the minutes, is there any objection to approving the minutes with those changes as described by Jared? So hearing none, we'll consider those approved. And now we've caught back up from my technical difficulties and we're right back on time, which is always a good thing. So actually really excited to have some substantive discussion here of kind of the programs and the changes to programs that have happened over the last year. You know, it's already been over a year since the Climate Action Plan was released, and a lot has happened in 2022 and the start of 2023. So I think it's great, and I really appreciate the folks that are here taking a little bit of time out of their busy schedules to come and share what's been going on in their worlds as it relates to implementation. And so I think we will start with, so we have, just to prime everybody, we have Sarah Phillips from the Office of Economic Opportunity to talk about our low income weatherization programs and related programs. Then we'll move on to Vermont Gas Systems efficiency programs with Tim Perrin, and move to Efficiency Vermont's programs with Kelly Lucci, and then talk about the Weatherization Repayment Assistance Program, which I know a number of folks on this call have been engaged in, but kind of actually, especially with the market rate programs of those efficiency utilities, kind of engages with both, and then also our distribution utility, electric utilities. So we'll start with Sarah with our low-income weatherization programs. Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks, TJ. And I have Jeff Wilcox, who's the Energy Services or Weatherization Director at OEO. He's here as well. He's the one who actually knows anything about weatherization. So I have some slides with some information, which I think is what you're looking for today, just to update you on where we're at, what the funding looks like, and then we'll just plan to answer questions for this committee. Thanks for having us. Let me see if I can share my screen. Oh. Let's see if I can do that. All right. All right, I like to think that that's working, but maybe it's not.
We can see it, or I can see it. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, great. Okay, so this is us for the Home Weatherization Assistance Program, right? Sometimes you call us WAP. We tend to avoid acronyms. We're based out of the Department for Children and Families and the Agency of Human Services. because I know sometimes there's a mix of people on the calls, just to make sure we do full comprehensive home weatherization for income eligible Vermonters at no cost. We have a nationally recognized program amongst our peers in the low-income weatherization space. We also include efficiency coaching as part of our practices to help people ensure that they're changing their behaviors as we make changes in their home. And we make a number of referrals around health and human services programs. Generally, our eligibility is 80% area median income or below, which adjusts based on household size. Can answer questions about how multifamily weatherization works. We weatherize the homes of both tenants, income eligible tenants, and income eligible homeowners. And I put a little link to our webpage there as well. So last year, we operate on the state fiscal year. That's our program year cycle. So whenever we refer to our year, it's based on that. Last year, spent about 13 million on weatherization activities. A little over 1,000 units were weatherized. You can see the breakdown there between single family and multifamily. We weatherize a lot of mobile homes and manufactured homes. That needs to be stated. That's an important part of equity work in the state of Vermont for us. We did not meet our target goals in terms of scale up for a lot of reasons. I'll talk about those in a second. 279 fewer units than projected. Apologies for the typo on the page. Our average program investment per household is a little over 10,000. You can see the number that I left on there from the prior year where it was about 9,500. So you've seen that our average investment per home is increased. I'll make that correction on the slide when I give it to you all to post. And our average energy savings last year was almost 29% per household. We did, again, add a link to, we do issue an annual legislative report with information about our program. And so I added that link here. Also, last year, worth noting, we are doing our best to embrace a whole home approach and to implement a zero deferral policy. That last one is aspirational. We are not always able to say we can't weatherize your home, but it's important that we do our best to try to get to yes. So we addressed a lot of deferral issues, things that would otherwise prevent homes from being weatherized, or with home repair funds, vermiculite remediation. We also install high efficient wooden pellet stoves in homes where that's appropriate. We do universal screening and installation of heat pumps now. That's new to our program. And we continue to partner directly and provide direct funding for 3 thermal for multifamily. So historically, some of you may be aware, we talked about our 5 weatherization agencies. Now we really partner with 6 agencies on an ongoing basis. Some big challenges for us last year, about a 15% crew vacancy rate. That's the #1 reason we weren't able to achieve our targets. Significant inflation in material costs, particularly in our core materials around cellulose and spray foam, just really astronomical increases in costs that are driving the costs in our program, and will continue to do so, we imagine. So this year, we've got about 22.2 million out for weatherization activities. That means a target of a little over 1,400 units. That's about almost a 40% ramp over what we actually last year. So you may be thinking what I'm thinking, which is we're not probably going to hit that target, but that doesn't mean that we're not shooting for the moon. ARPA investments in weatherization. So we had some ARPA LIHEAP funds. Those were one-time funds that were initially appropriated to us. We spent 2.1 million of those. Those funds expired 9/23. We got an initial appropriation of 4 million in ARPA SFR funds to address deferral issues, install heat pumps, stoves, multifamily weatherization, and then most recently got a 50 million ARPA appropriation. Those funds expired 2026. Also this year, we've had a statewide campaign for worker and customer recruitment. We're working to refine our customer recruitment marketing to be more targeted and outreach to underserved communities. I didn't put it on here, but we just translated all our weatherization application. We're really excited we finally did that. We made some major changes in our demographic data tracking so we can do better equity analysis. We're also, our programs are working on truck and equipment purchases to scale up. There's some significant delays in being able to purchase trucks. That's creating some challenges on the ground. We implemented a statewide minimum wage requirement for crew positions and simultaneously adjusted our inflationary formula to consider prevailing wages in the producer price index as opposed to just being linked to the CPI. Our program's based in state statute and also federal regulations. So these are sometimes not small and insignificant changes for us, but that can make a real difference. Currently, we're at about a 9% vacancy of crew. So we've made some great improvements. So things like increasing wages at the bottom really do matter. And we also have 3 new staff at OEO to support our work. So we've been busy. So scaling up. Here's what we think it looks like. We're still trying to hit a target of about 8,400 units by the end of 26. I mean, some pretty significant ramp up. You see, we pushed, we're trying to do the bulk of that in the early years. So we have a little bit of cushion if we can't quite get there quite as fast. But the goal is by the end of the time period of the ARPA funds, we'll have doubled the size of the program. But then we'll have a big drop. So state fiscal year 27 for your benefit showed you what it will look like for us statewide if we don't see some new funds coming in. Our big funding, let me show you what that looks like. So we have our base funding is what we call HWAP funds, Home Weatherization Assistance Program. This is what formerly was called the Weatherization Trust Fund, right? This is the fuel tax. This is core funding for our program. We have over the past several years done what's called a swap. It's not actually a swap of funds. It's built into our budget where the LIHEAP program takes about $3 million a year of the special fund of the fuel tax revenue to support a fuel assistance benefit for households above what the federal LIHEAP program allows. And we in turn take $3 million approximately of LIHEAP funds to support weatherization. So it's not an increase in funding for us, but we do a little bit of a swap. So we have some LIHEAP funds involved in the program. It also includes our DOE base funding. We've made some assumptions around that based on our current year's award. I did show the LIHEAP ARPA funds in here, the ARPA SFR funds, DOE infrastructure funds, and then the admin funds. You kind of see how that splits out. They'll, ultimately what we end up investing in heat pumps or stoves or vermiculite or home repair, those numbers might shift. We've made some estimates based on what we think we will need, but some of these things like zero deferral and universal screening for heat pumps, those are new things to our program. So we've set some targets and we'll just have to adjust them as we go. This does include direct funding for 3 thermal multifamily weatherization as well. So we're not the only funder there. We recognize that EVT is an important funder for 3 thermal. They exist for the exact purpose of coordinating multiple funding sources to support multifamily weatherization. So glad to continue to be working with them and using their capacity to expand our work. And I will stop there and answer questions. I can figure out how to stop. I can't figure out how to stop. Pause share.
All right.
Stop.
So it looks like Christine, you're up first.
Thank you, Sarah. That was very substantive and very concise. And I have been pretty aware of the WAP program in Vermont and in other states off and on over a couple of decade time frame as a consultant in this space. And I just want to commend you on the program enhancements and changes that you've made very quickly over the last year or two. And that was very, very pleasing report to hear. So thank you for that. And I can only imagine it's been like a whirlwind of change and activity for all of you.
Thanks, Christine. And Jeff's not on camera, but I just want to call out that I get the privilege of presenting a bunch of information without actually being the one that does a lot of the hard work. So Jeff and the team at OEO and our weatherization programs around the state have really stepped up to the challenge. It's hard work. It's hard feeling like we're not doing as much as we want to be doing and as much as we're being asked to be doing. So appreciate that comment a lot, Christine.
So I have a comment or two, but I want to open up the floor to anybody else have any questions for Sarah? Dave, go ahead.
Thank you. And +1 on Christine's comments. This is really great. Can you explain why there are 15% fewer crews doing the work?
Yeah, it's not 15% fewer. We, based on what we know it takes to get the work done, we know how many crew we need in order to meet the targets. And then we track very closely with our agencies where they're at in terms of those positions being filled. So when we say we have a 15% vacancy rate, it might mean that, I'm just making up numbers, we need 100 crew in order to meet the targets that have been set for the year. And we only have 85, right? That's a 15% vacancy rate. Right now we're at a 9% vacancy rate. So we have hired, the collective we, our agencies that we partner with, they've hired a lot of people. They just aren't at the level that they need to be in order to meet the targets for the year.
Thank you.
So Sarah, thanks for the presentation. And again, apologies to everyone that I don't have a video today. I have a couple of practical questions and an observation or two. So I'll start with the questions, and just for clarification, when you say around $10,000 investment in homes, is that including kind of the additional programs that, or the additional technologies, I guess, that you've recently added, like heat pumps or stoves, or are those kind of on top of that average investment?
Yeah, those are on top. So TJ, as you know, and maybe others, both the federal regulations and state statutes set an average job cost average or allowable cost per unit that we are required to achieve across the program as a whole. And certain costs are included in that and certain costs are not. So it can be a little misleading, but that's what that number is speaking to. It doesn't include, for instance, heating system replacements when we need to do that. It doesn't include home repair or vermiculite investments. It doesn't include the heat pump or stove, efficient stoves. Jeff, you can speak to, I think, probably better than I can, what else it doesn't include. There's a lot it doesn't include, unfortunately.
Right.
It doesn't include training and technical assistance. That is a good part of our program as well. But you get the major items there listed.
It includes all the offsite and onsite costs associated with core weatherization activities made in homes.
Right. Great. Thanks for that clarification. I think I wanted to draw that out a little bit, just because I think a lot of this group will be talking about some of those numbers as we get into some of the thermal sector analysis that's going to happen. And I guess that last point that you made, Jeff, I think I've seen costs and average investments in the past that numbers that were like in the 12,000 range. And I think that included kind of some of those training and I don't want to minimize what they are, but I'm going to say administrative costs associated with the program. And I just wanted to make sure everybody was aware of what that included.
Yeah. Thanks, TJ. I think, yeah, you can't take that number and then just multiply by the number of units you want us to do and say that's how much funding is needed, because it doesn't take into account things like trucks or equipment, right, which are pulled out of that number as well. And So yeah, I think that's an important point. And when we budget for scaling up, we budget for the full cost of what it means to implement the program, not just what's included in the official job cost average.
Right, thanks. The other thing I really just want to highlight, and sorry for doing so much talking here, but is the number you put on there for state fiscal year 2027. And I know everybody on this call is probably astute enough to have caught that, but you know, it was a 1,300 unit reduction in you know, jobs completed, or however you want to characterize it, units. And I think that's it's one of the things that just wanted to have this be an outcome of this meeting, is just kind of the understanding of, hey, we're ramping up like crazy and doing a lot, and then when a lot of this federal funding goes away, we really need to think about what the impacts are going to be of do nothing versus do something versus do everything. And I think that going back to, you know, the funding that we know we have, it draws a stark picture, and I think that's going to be the case when Kelly talks as well. But I just wanted to draw that out here. So I'm actually not sure how long you and Sarah and Jeff have. If you, I do, there are some workforce questions that I think would be good for discussion. But if you're able to stick around, it'd be great to kind of hear from everybody, and then maybe talk about workforce. If not, then we could talk about it now a little bit. But
Yeah, I need to go at 1:30, so I'm happy to stay until then. And
okay.
Jeff may be able to stay longer.
Okay, great. I think we could have all the presentations and then talk about workforce. I think we'll scheduled to be done by then. So thank
Great.
you for that, and thank you for that presentation, and all the work you do in implementing. So let's move on to Kelly Lucci. Oh, actually, I'm sorry. I think I have Tim next from Efficiency Vermont Gas.
Hi, TJ, sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, hi Tim.
Hi, this is Ryan Patch from the Agency of
Oh.
Agriculture, liaison for Ag and Ecosystem Subcommittee. I'm on the phone and moving, so I can't raise my hand. I apologize. And this may have been on the slides. So understanding the benefit or payment per unit around 10,000, I was curious for this program, is there any cost that's borne by the resident of those units? Is there a cost share percentage, or how does that work out for the end user? Thanks.
Yeah, income eligible Vermonters do not have any costs associated with the weatherization activities. It's a no cost program in that sense. You know, some sort of exceptions to that would be when it comes to things like readiness issues, home repair, or vermiculite. Sometimes, you know, we're working to put together a package of how to address those issues, and homeowners may be contributing towards those costs. But the weatherization costs are covered. And then the other exception would be in the case of multifamily weatherization. If the landlord themselves is not income eligible, then they need to address the home repair and vermiculite issues. They need to cover the cost of some of the health and safety improvements that need to be made in the apartment, but the other weatherization costs are covered. Jeff, anything I got wrong there you want to clarify?
Nope, you got it right.
All right.
It
Thanks.
doesn't happen that often that clients are able to you know, use their own funds to address any structural issues, and we've done all we can to connect with other programs and bring in some other funds, but sometimes it happens.
Understood. Thank you very much.
And thanks, Ryan, for the question. Sorry, I called you Tim. Your box was right next to Tim's box, and had some cognitive dissonance when yours lit up.
No worries, thanks.
So, and then I misread the agenda too. I actually think we have Tim Perrin from Vermont Gas is up next. Hey, Tim.
Good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yep.
Can you see me as well?
We can see you also.
Okay, perfect. Let me get my PowerPoint queued up here. I also have a few slides to share, writing a little bit of background as to Vermont Gas and some of our evolving programs to strive for net zero by 2050, as well as an overview of our energy efficiency programs and some of the changes that we've made over this most recent performance period. And then a few slides that provide a deeper dive on our weatherization programs and some ideas and opportunities as that evolves to leverage pull downs of federal funding and new ideas to be able to scale more effectively. So let's see how this works. Can you see my slides?
Yes.
All right,
Yep.
Great. Well, thank you so much for the invitation to have this conversation with you this afternoon. My name is Tim Perrin. I manage our energy efficiency and innovation programs at Vermont Gas Systems, also known as VGS. So by way of background, VGS is Northwestern Vermont's integrated energy services company. We've been a natural gas company since the mid-60s timeframe. We've operated our own energy efficiency programs since 1992, been doing it for 3 decades now, and are looking to evolve some of our business model as well as the products and services that we offer our customers that still remain in alignment with some of our core values of safety, reliability, and affordability, but are really looking at ways that we can help our customers and the state effectively decarbonize through some of our transformational values of focusing on customers and what they care about, being able to deliver pro-climate products and services, and shape and adapt our culture in response to all of that. The Global Warming Solutions Act is one of our North Stars and guiding posts for some near-term goals, as well as our net zero by 2050 goal. And we're looking to transform our organization from what has historically been a fossil fuel distribution company into something that's delivering integrated thermal energy services for our customers and perhaps beyond. So our 3 key pillars for our net zero strategy, first, which we'll be talking about today, is expanding our weatherization and energy efficiency programs. Also, we're slowly but surely diversifying and growing our alternative supply, which now includes renewable natural gas. We have a hydrogen pilot with Global Foundries. We're exploring how to look at network geothermal. So the same piping infrastructure in the ground, just a different working fluid in order to transfer that thermal energy, as well as district heating within the city of Burlington and within other communities, as well as being able to launch a series of renewable heating solutions. So helping customers decarbonize and diversify their thermal energy mix behind the meter. We're the first gas utility in the country to be offering heat pump water heaters, electric heat pump water heaters on your natural gas bill as a rental, and exploring how to deliver the same approach for dual fuel or hybrid heating systems, which combines a high efficiency gas furnace with an A coil or a heat pump, and giving customers the tools and resources so that they can switch between electric mode versus gas mode, depending on the cost of the fuels as well as carbon intensity, depending on what their goals are. And really looking at ways to be able to integrate some of those controls so that it can effectively respond to what the customer has set, and you don't have to worry about making those changes over time. So diving in more specifically to our energy efficiency programs. This is a historical look as well as going out to 2030 in terms of where we've been with historical budgets for our energy efficiency programs going back to 1994, and the proposed budgetary request that's part of our most recent demand resource plan, which is now in front of the Public Utilities Commission. At a high level, I'll share that I know the focus today is more on residential weatherization, but if you look at kind of the budget versus impact mix, Around 70% of our budget during this performance period is targeted at being able to deliver residential programs, which I'll dive into in just a moment. And around 31% is for commercial. Kind of the inverse of that relates to the actual thermal energy reductions that we're expecting to achieve during this performance period. So it's much more cost effective to serve commercial customers where you can achieve an economy of scale, do a series of large projects versus residential offerings where it's much smaller individual savings, but a volume-based program, both through equipment replacement as well as weatherization. So just didn't want to lose sight of some of that. So here's a look at our portfolio. We offer 3 residential programs, 3 commercial programs that largely mirror one another. Residential weatherization is also known as our retrofit program. So we work with single family, multifamily homes, have a distinct offering for condominiums, as well as manufactured housing. We have incentives that can scale between 50% of the installed cost of a weatherization job up to 75%, or even in some cases up to 100%, working in partnership with CVOEO to be able to offer for low-income customers the same deal that they'd get going through a weatherization assistance program. We also offer low-cost financing, realizing that incentives alone may not be enough to help customers overcome that first cost hurdle. So we've partnered with Green Mountain Credit Union to offer 0% financing over 5 years, and then have up to 5% financing, either with the Green Mountain Credit Union or through the Weatherization Repayment Assistance Program, where a customer could effectively finance weatherization improvements over a 15-year term at an APR typically in the 4 to 5% range. We can also help customers finance some of the health and safety issues that may serve as barriers to being able to move forward with good weatherization projects. Things like vermiculite, asbestos, moisture, knob and tube wiring, things that prevent being able to actually provide cost-effective treatments within buildings that can cost, upwards of $20,000 in order to remediate that before being able to move forward with any type of weatherization treatments. For our program evolution, we've really distinctly started more of a focus on income eligible households. We've increased our incentive share, going from a 50% cost share up to a 75% cost share, and are starting to collect more data as part of the intake process for customers who are interested in an energy evaluation to understand how many low and moderate income households are we serving, and then how to prioritize those households by determining the high use categories, perhaps a little bit differently for income eligible versus market rate, so that we can get more of those income eligible households into the queue through our fast track program with a free VGS led audit, and then working with contractors that we partnered with to deliver agreed upon pricing. We provide the quality assurance associated with those projects. In the efficient equipment realm, things like high efficiency boilers, furnaces, water heaters, and smart thermostats. Rebate options, as well as 0% financing as an either or option, but exploring how to expand upon that. We have an income eligible bonus for the first time ever for qualifying low and moderate income households, a bonus incentive layered on top of the base incentive, and are starting to figure out how we could potentially do the financing in addition to the incentive that these customers are receiving. We're laying the groundwork for a midstream delivery model. So going from a downstream rebate form that a customer needs to complete and send in with purchase documentation that can lead to some administrative inefficiencies, to a midstream delivery model at point of purchase, working with the distributors so that we're able to scale some of our impact, reduce some of the administrative burdens associated with having to complete and review and chase down some of the necessary documentation, and provide a more seamless experience for customers. With this midstream program being able to not only serve boilers, furnaces, and water heaters, but also set the stage and the framework for emerging technologies that we're starting to explore through our new product development team. New construction, we partner closely with Efficiency Vermont. It's a market-based program working with home builders to achieve or ideally exceed the renewable building energy standards, and providing direct incentive support to help customers get closer to a net zero goal. We're in partnership right now with a coalition of not only the energy efficiency utilities, public service, led by Energy Futures Group and partnering with a few other state agencies to explore whether we can pull down funding from the Department of Energy to have more robust code compliance mechanisms that may be out there, perhaps supporting home energy raters on every residential new construction project to ensure that we're helping customers be able to meet the prevailing energy codes and then know what it takes in order to exceed those, again, towards that net zero by 2030 goal. For commercial energy services, we have a small commercial team working with our largest businesses as well as small and medium businesses across our service territory through identifying retrofit opportunities. So cost-effective energy efficiency improvements where the energy efficiency savings will pay for replacing something that might be working perfectly fine right now, as well as efficient equipment. So those same high efficiency boilers, furnaces, water heaters, unit heaters, and other perhaps more specialized process equipment associated with a commercial or industrial site. We have incentives to be able to help overcome some of that incremental cost hurdle and ensure that customers are selecting higher performance equipment at time of replacement. And then again, also with new construction, a close partnership with Efficiency Vermont and Burlington Electric to be able to provide for some of that initial plan review, scoping, opportunity assessment, and then providing incentive support for some of those energy savings measures that exceed the commercial building energy standard. Looking more closely at our weatherization programs over the last 7 years, and then going out to 2030, you can see how the number of VGS funded weatherized units have trended over time. Some of the nature of that sawtooth pattern really relates to how effective we are with being able to engage existing multifamily, as well as condo developments and townhouses. If we're able to work with an interested condo association or a large multifamily property owner, be able to get their attention and be able to move forward with a good cost-effective project, we can typically see large swings in the number of units, even if the number of projects that we're delivering upon remains relatively steady. Those types of larger unit properties are typically more cost effective to serve. So we're always looking, trying to figure out how to develop relationships, develop the value proposition, and be able to move forward with those efforts. And you can see that coming in 2025 or so, there's a bit of a trailing off. You'd expect to align with some of the statewide goals to see kind of a steady increase in the number of weatherized units through our program. The trailing off really relates to, we're hopeful that through being able to leverage funding through the Inflation Reduction Act, we won't need to spend as much of the ratepayer funded dollars on incentive support, particularly for moderate income households, but be able to still maintain our programs, continue to grow our contractor workforce, deliver our fast track program through the project scoping, the relationship management, the quality assurance, and ensuring that contractors are paid on time, by VGS serving as an aggregator as a to pull down some of those federal funds and pass them along to our customers. So the goal is ultimately to increase the number of weatherized units. These projections are really based on if we're only able to use VGS ratepayer dollars alone, what do we expect to do in that scenario? Relating to the corresponding budgets, kind of the same pattern, 2024, 2025, we're expecting a ramp up related to the ratepayer funded portion of our weatherization program, and then a trailing off of that, again, to be able to leverage some of that Hope for Homes funding, and potentially looking at the interplay between ratepayer funded dollars and federal dollars to be able to expand some of the financing for things like the health and safety measures, the vermiculite remediation, the knob and tube wiring that can serve as a really expensive barrier that even with the 0% over 5 years, some customers just can't manage to get over that obstacle. So by being able to potentially expand the term and think about new and creative ways of being able to move forward with those improvements before weatherization can be done, we expect to be able to do more projects in the homes that typically need it the most. We've also been tuned into a program with Burlington International Airport and the Federal Aviation Administration called the BTV Sound Mitigation Initiative, something that's been talked about for a number of years. We're actually, the first batch of 15 pilot homes are in design and will likely be constructed by the end of this spring. And then from that experience, we'll learn more about what's worked well, what services and value can we provide on the energy auditing, as well as the quality assurance front, and the anticipation of being able to deliver 50 additional homes across our service territory by using our incentive dollars to serve as a local match to be able to pull down a 90% cost share from the federal government and be able to expand the weatherization workforce largely through being able to get other contractors, maybe some out-of-state ones, into the mix, delivering some of these sound mitigation treatments that just happen to work out to be good weatherization improvements as well. We're also in partnership with Efficiency Vermont to figure out how we can cross-train other trades, individuals who are in the vermiculite remediation business, those who might be in pest control, or they might be doing some level of weatherization improvements already, or in the case of vermiculite, pull the vermiculite out of the attic, it provides a great opportunity to be able to get into a building, air seal it properly, and then layer in new cellulose to up to or exceeding energy code in a relatively easy way. So how can we tap into work that may already be happening within Vermonters' homes, within our customers' homes, and really have a focus on air sealing and ensuring that's done well to be able to do the weatherization treatments as an easy incremental cost that maybe our program covers entirely. Related to that, we're exploring how to deliver a VGS home sealer initiative. We've identified that there's a handful of weatherization contractors that do great insulation work, but aren't necessarily as focused on doing a quality air sealing job to ensure that that insulation performs as expected over time. So what if through an in-house crew or a directly subcontracted resource, we could provide the ventilation improvements to improve indoor air quality, as well as deliver those most focused and most important air sealing measures that could potentially open the door for other weatherization contractors who we know are doing work right now, but may not meet our quality assurance standards, give them access to be able to help our customers do more projects across our landscape. As well as knowledge is power. And this last link here is a website that was developed by the Department of Public Service a few years ago that probably is overdue for a refresh in terms of the latest information around weatherization programs, the available incentive support, how to leverage federal dollars, as well as start to help customers transition to beneficial electrification like heat pumps, so that customers, whether they're VGS customers or outside of our service territory, have access to the same reliable, consistent information through an independent third party like the department. So we'd love to be able to see and support being able to dust off, improve upon some of the information, and then more effectively leverage a resource like this with our customers going forward. That's it for some of my prepared remarks and thoughts. I'd love to open it up for questions.
Jared, go ahead.
Thanks, Tim, for this presentation and overview. I wanted to see if you could go back to slide 4. I had a question. That pie chart on in the bottom right, 2021 to 23 MMBTU, is that MMBTU provided or avoided due to the efficiency investments?
Good question, Jared. It's avoided. So this relates to the impact that we're looking to achieve and on pace to during our current performance period. So the reduction in MMBTUs for our customers.
That's what I thought. I just wanted to make sure. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. Of course.
Okay. So there's a couple questions in the chat I think would be useful. So I'll just share them unless others want to just raise their hand. But how many of those weatherization units that you're talking about are funded by or completed by CVOEO? And just to make sure, we want to clarify whether those are, or just make sure they're not double counted by VGS and OEO programs.
These units are the ones that exclude those where we provide some level of funding support towards the units delivered by CVOEO. So these are additive to CVOEO's delivery.
Great, thanks. And then the next question is on the budget. So if you want to pop over to the budget slide, if you can explain the variations in the budgets from 2022 to 2025 and then back to 2030.
Sure. Yep, so the budgets from 2024 onward are proposed at this point. They have not been approved by the Public Utilities Commission, and we're in the midst of our demand resource plan to negotiate and navigate exactly that. But our proposal at this point is really to be able to increase our focus on moderate income households, which typically require more incentive support and sometimes a little bit more staff resource in order to get these across the finish line towards implementing cost-effective improvements. So we're right now around 20% of the projects that we've been able to provide incentives for over the past year have been qualified as moderate income households. We're looking to flip that and actually expand upon it with the goal of actually being 2/3 of the units that we weatherize being income qualified. So that's the ramp up in the near term in 2024 and 2025, as the state figures out how to potentially pull down some of the Inflation Reduction Act funding and establish the rules and the guidelines associated with that. And then the trailing off of some of our budgets is in anticipation, or perhaps the hope, that we're able to leverage some of that federal funding to be able to augment our existing budget. We would still continue to provide weatherization services through our staff time, through our contractor base, and still likely being able to provide some level of incentive support to customers while allowing them to be able to access additional funding that in some cases may be much higher than what we could potentially afford through a ratepayer funded program, or be utilizing a bundled funding approach to be able to overcome things like health and safety measures that may be standing in the way. So the ramp up over the next few years is in anticipation as IRA funding rules and details are actually being sorted out, with the goal of being able to leverage that through 2033.
Thanks, Tim. I may add to that one, since I was around for the last budget period in more of the efficiency world, is that Vermont Gas and the department wanted to do more weatherization and thermal efficiency, but we're really cognizant, especially in 2020, of rate impacts right at the time of the pandemic, right? So energy efficiency budgets are usually expensed, meaning like you collect what you're going to spend in that year, what you're budgeting to spend in that year. And for the 21 to 23 period, Vermont Gas had approved by the commission with the department's support that they could actually treat them as capital investments as a regulated utility, so that they would earn a return, a lesser return than they normally would on kind of a distribution investment, but they'd be able to earn a return in exchange for kind of moderating the efficiency charge increases, but able to have the budget to really expand their programs. What Tim's showing you on this slide here is just the weatherization budgets, but overall, Vermont Gas's budget went from here it is, around 3 million to, up to $6 million in 2026 in the long-term projection, and only through 2023 was approved, but there was a trajectory kind of planned for that went up to 2026. And so I just wanted the committee to kind of understand that difference in funding approach that was taken for the explicit purpose of enhancing efficiency, kind of matching up the investment timeline with where the savings timeline comes. But it does come at the expense of a rate of return, right? That it costs more to spread those in the cost of those investments over time. But I think that's pretty unique for at least for the last 20 years in Vermont, or 15 years. Vermont Gas did the programs that way in the early 2000s and in the 90s, I think, and we returned to that because of the need for more weatherization.
Yeah, thanks for calling that out, TJ. It was an oversight on my part, but definitely
no worries.
Innovation in terms of being able to ramp up quickly without a doubling of the energy efficiency charge in the near term.
So thanks, Tim. I think with that, given our time, we should move on to Kelly's presentation on behalf of Efficiency Vermont.
Perfect. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, I can.
Great. I'm just going to share my screen and I'll thank you all for the opportunity to join you today and to share an update. I've tried to keep it fairly concise and I'm happy to answer questions. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So just to name it, Efficiency Vermont obviously operates a number of programs, the electric and the thermal side. I have focused this update exclusively on residential weatherization. I'm certainly happy to provide more information as needed on any of the other topics, but I wanted to keep it relatively focused and concise. So this is the quick topics I'm going to hit on. I've only got 5 actual slides of substance, so I'll just jump right into them. So Efficiency Vermont supported weatherization programs are intended to serve customers outside of Vermont gas territory and who do not qualify for the weatherization programs that Sarah spoke about that are income eligible. We leverage a market-based program. So the contractors who actually do the work completing the projects are not Efficiency Vermont employees. They are private contractors who have elected to participate in the Efficiency Excellence Network as home performance with Energy Star contractors, which means that they've committed to meet a set of standards around their own training, their own knowledge, and program standards such that they can offer incentives from Efficiency Vermont to customers who they weatherize. As you can see, we've got at any given time about 60 contractors in our network. Tim and Sarah actually teed up some great themes I'll probably be able to bring home here. But I just learned yesterday, we're starting to see some contractors who actually want to continue participating in the program, but don't want to be visible on our website right now because they are so busy and they're getting so many requests that they can't follow through and fulfill right now, given the current workforce challenges. So, we'll come back to that theme, but I just wanted to name that because I felt like that was a very interesting on the ground data point from our program manager that you all might be curious about. We are an energy saving program at heart. We have not always had a focus on serving low and moderate income customers. When the program first started, the focus was on getting as many energy savings as possible. Those two things don't need to be in conflict with each other, but there is a natural tension that exists. So we introduced a new structure to provide in income-based incentives, which allowed us to provide additional incentives for customers who qualified as below 120% of area median income, so typically defined as moderate income in Vermont. We did that in the middle of 2019 because we recognized that we wanted to make sure this program was accessible to a broader range of customers. On average, since 2018, in the 5 years since, we've had about 800 projects a year complete through the program. That can vary year to year for some of the reasons Tim mentioned, and certainly now we're seeing the workforce constraints have a dampening effect on the number of projects that we can serve in any given year. In 2022, pursuant to our leveraging some federal dollars, we actually introduced an even more stringent income verification process where we partner with Opportunities Credit Union. It's a very simple process, but rather than using self-verification, we can say like these customers absolutely qualify as moderate income. And so I thought you'd be interested in the data point that since that was introduced, we've had about 39% of customers participating in Efficiency Vermont's program who qualify as moderate income or below. The other point I wanted to make, which is follows on something Tim noted, is this is a relatively high cost and low savings program. If all we cared about were energy savings, there are much more cost effective on a per unit basis ways to get those savings. So I shared here, we see about an average of $310 per MMBTU saved through our residential weatherization programs. Just for point of comparison, if we have folks installing pipe insulation for a large commercial and industrial customer, the cost of that can be like $10 an MMBTU. So there's a big delta. And it just, to me, points to the fact that there are many other reasons we do weatherization. It's not exclusively around energy savings, but it's important to keep in mind as we look to continue doing this work through programs that are structured ultimately around cost-effective delivery of energy savings. Sarah noted it, that they have a partnership with 3E Thermal. Efficiency Vermont does as well. Typically, the way that plays out is we'll provide additional funding that allows 3E Thermal to go deeper on projects they're serving. But as Sarah said, they're very adept at providing a kind of a mix of funding and superb support to multifamily projects. And we're very happy to continue partnering with them. So I just wanted to provide some of the market context we're seeing right now. 3 major points I wanted to highlight. Acute near-term workforce constraints. As I said, we're hearing from contractors who don't feel like they can follow up with customers at the level they would like to right now. We're aware that there are some contractors who are booking 6 to 9 months out for projects because they don't have enough people to get the work done. And one facet of this that I really want to emphasize, because I think you're going to see a theme when I get into some of my charts, along with what Sarah and Tim have shared. The work in weatherization over the last few years across all of our programs has had a little bit of an up and down kind of boom and bust cycle to it. And that's in part based on the funding sources that we're leveraging and just what's been available to us. What we hear from contractors is that one of the number one ways for them to plan their businesses and to create consistency and to build their workforces is to have consistency in terms of the support and the programs that are out there backing them up. So they can go out and say with certainty, this is going to be available, these robust incentives, I can plan my business, it's worth me hiring up. I think what we had happen with some prior cycles of funding from the federal government was you saw a great job ramping up and then that funding disappeared, and it was very hard to get folks to want to continue to be engaged in this industry. So as we look ahead to the decline of ARPA funding, this is very much on our minds, and it's consistent with what we hear from contractors. So it's near-term workforce constraints, but then really thinking about what is the impact of not addressing those in a strategic way on our ability to continue delivering quality programs over the next decade in line with what Vermont's energy goals are asking us to do. The other theme, we're seeing increased project costs, similar to what Sarah shared, and complexity of projects. Typically the range I give for what it costs, the total project costs we see coming through our program is anywhere between 8,000 and 12,000. Because it's a market-based program, we don't require that customers do everything recommended by a contractor. They do enough to meet a certain standard, but historically we've kind of allowed them to chunk off pieces of projects, complete them over time, structure the work, according to the budget they have available, provided they meet a minimum standard of energy savings. We're seeing, there are fewer projects that are coming in on the lower end of that cost curve now, and we're seeing that the ones we're taking on that are maybe higher level. It's great. People are wanting to do more. They might want to build in a heat pump at the same time as they weatherize, but it is a little bit more complex to manage for contractors. And then the third point I wanted to make is that as we get more into serving low and moderate income Vermonters, we recognize that they face more barriers than customers who can pay a higher percentage of projects. And those barriers aren't just around the costs. Costs are a big part of it. But it might be, we have moderate income customers who have significant home repair needs that have to be addressed before they can weatherize. There may be just a need for additional support as they move through a process that you wouldn't, typically, expect to deliver as an energy program. So we've thought about a lot of that as we have put our proposals together for how to deploy some of the federal dollars that we're very grateful the state has made available for us to deploy to customers through these programs. And I'm going to talk on the next slide about some of our plans there. I do just want to note, and I'll get to this at the very end, currently, our proposal for deploying the second tranche of funding that's been made available to us, about $35 million, those plans are under review. The Department of Public Service has been a great partner in that, and the Agency of Administration. But just keep in mind there's an asterisk here, because we do have to finish the process in order to actually launch any of these things. So I'm sharing with you a little bit behind the curtain of what those plans are without being able to tell you 100% this is exactly what it's going to look like. But we've been very pleased at the partnership with the state to begin thinking about this. So I mentioned to you, we run into more barriers when we try to serve more low and moderate income customers. So we've really tried to craft a proposal and a plan that addresses those barriers in a multifaceted way. It's going to mean that we're paying more and our costs are more as a program implementers to serve these customers. But we think it's worth it because these customers deserve to have easy access to program and services. So first off, we will be looking to increase our incentives. Currently, we pay 75% of project costs up to $5,000. We will be increasing that cost share on July 1. We'll be sharing more details on that as we get closer to the time. We try not to telegraph incentive changes in a lot of specificity before plans are finalized and before we have a chance to let all of our contractors know at the same time. So suffice it to say, those will be increasing. We also are looking to provide enhanced technical assistance to customers, recognizing that it may be beneficial to them to feel like they've got somebody at Efficiency Vermont who they can consult with as they're thinking about a project. It's not intending to play like a general contractor role where we're assigning a contractor to a project, but it does provide them with that independent third-party direct contact they can work with as they're thinking about pursuing their project. And it builds on a lot of work we've ramped up over the years related to home energy visits and providing direct service-focused support to residential customers. We also plan to introduce a home repair fund. It's not as though the need to address issues like vermiculite or roof repairs and other health and safety type of issues goes away when you get above 80% of area median income. We've never had the resources as a program, though, to provide support to offset those costs. So we're really excited to be looking at introducing a home repair fund that could provide up to $15,000 of additional support per project for repairs that would be required for safe and effective weatherization. So again, that's proposed in the plan that's being reviewed right now. In addition, we'd be looking at providing increased incentive support for rental properties and thinking about how we can knit that in with some of our existing programs that don't rely on 3E thermal, where you need to be income qualified. How can we move more into the moderate income space for folks who might be renting properties? And so there'd be an increase in incentives and support for folks who are in that market. Next, I just wanted to provide a really high level kind of look back 5 years and then a look ahead with what's going on with the federal dollars coming in. I could have made like the pie on the left a lot smaller, but I just wanted to capture sort of the increasing complexity that we're managing around as a program implementer. So if you look back at the 5 years up until 2021, about $30 million was available over those 5 years for these weatherization programs. And the mix of funding for those is a combination of the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, the Forward Capacity Market, and we had a blip of funding in 2019 and 2020 through something called Act 62 that allowed us to actually introduce the income-based incentives and make those more robust, which was great. But again, we've got a little bit of a boom and bust pattern that's happened. If you look ahead to 2022 through 2026, the scale is bigger. We're talking about more like $80 million when we take into account the federal support that's been added in to these programs. And you can see we also have an increasing share of customers we'll be serving who will have the majority of their heat through electricity, which allows us to leverage some of our electric efficiency funds to provide for the weatherization of those homes. So that becomes an increasing piece of the pie as well. The other thing I want to name is there is an appropriation that Senator Leahy was able to get through in the federal budget before he retired. We're very grateful to him for that. That's for a program called Clean Heat Homes. We are in the very early stages of working with folks like VHFA, VGS, and others to actually do planning for that program. And DOE at the federal level is pretty backed up. So we haven't had a chance to really make contact with them. But I just wanted to name that there is planning for that additional funding that's happening as well. And those program details will be defined as we get a chance to work with our partners federally and within Vermont. So finally, just wanted to share kind of our bar chart of projects that we're anticipating at this point, preliminary forecast. You can see I included the 3 years up until now, so you could get kind of a decade's view. I'm seeing a pattern with others. 2022 was an interesting year. We we saw fewer projects happening than we had hoped. And I think that really relates to a lot of the market conditions that we've noted above. In terms of what's on the right side of this, this dashed line in this graph, that's our current forecast. We're really digging in based on what we learned from 2022 to understand how realistic are these numbers? How much are we going to be able to hit? Currently, it's based on what we've put forward in our demand resource plan proceeding, plus the estimates we've made as we have pulled together our grant applications for the 2 tranches of federal dollars that have been made available to the program. So you can see there's a ramp up, and then as TJ noted, there's a cliff in 2027. And that's something that we'll have increasing focus on from our contractors as we get to that stage. But we're hoping to be able to be as strategic as possible in mitigating the impact of that. I did note I have not put anything here related to Clean Heat Homes. We are not at the point with that program where we can anticipate where it might be additive to in terms of the number of jobs that we can expect to see over the next decade. So I just wanted to close by noting what happens next. So the federal funding, kind of the round 2 of it, the 35 million, as I noted, that plan is currently being reviewed by the Department of Public Service and the Agency of Administration. We are working to ensure that we can increase our incentives on July 1, regardless of where that lands, because we know the change won't happen. The dollars, even if they're not available immediately on July 1, they'll be available relatively soon, and we want to create some structure and predictability for the market and for contractors. In terms of workforce development, we were also asked to deploy some funding related to the weatherization workforce. So I just wanted to note we have contracts underway with Resource and Vermont Adult Learning. Those are intended to focus on increasing capacity, bringing new entrants into the weatherization workforce. We also have done a lot of work with our current contractor network to increase their training and give them the ability to serve more projects, within their current workforce, increasing where they can. And I just wanted to note, we're really excited by a partnership with the Office of Economic Opportunity to explore bringing a weatherization training center resource to Vermont, which would be a huge benefit to both the state programs and to the private contractor network that we collaborate with. And then, as I said, Clean Heat Homes, we're working with the Department of Energy to understand what that program might look like and what standards we need to meet in terms of federal parameters, and to design that collaboratively with many of the partners that you'll hear from today. So that is it from me, and I'm happy to take questions, and I can also stay until 1:30 for a more focused conversation on workforce if needed.
Great.
Actually, I can stay a little beyond 1:30 if needed. I'm looking at the time.
Thanks, Kelly. Really appreciate the presentation, all that information. Any questions for Kelly? Right. I just observed that even without the federal funding, there was expected to be a drop off in what Efficiency Vermont had available for funding from the forward capacity market and Reggie. I think it maybe that the problems exacerbated, I guess, by federal funding. I mean, that part is a good problem to have, that we have the federal funding, but it is even just a much bigger, cliff. But there was one to start with right around that same time.
Yeah, thank you, TJ. I appreciate that. It's been great, and it probably makes the cliff a little bit higher.
Right. Great. Okay. Well, I note that we're a little bit behind schedule, but I think that's okay. I think the next steps conversation can go really quickly. So let's move right into a presentation from Maura Collins from VHFA. Hi, Maura. Thanks for coming.
Hi, thanks for having me. As I just want to level set everyone's expectations, we are moving from a bunch of energy people who are wicked smart about the things you're normally used to talking about to a housing finance person who is less familiar with some of the energy components and more going to talk to you about a financing opportunity that relates to all this. Hopefully you can see my slides that I think a lot of you have heard about the WRAP program, the Weatherization Repayment Assistance Program. I'm starting to talk and realizing I didn't introduce myself. I'm the executive director of the Vermont Housing Finance Agency. Sorry about that. We are just about a 50-year-old organization that finances affordable housing, mortgages, and multifamily housing by giving loans to developers who build rental housing that's affordable, and mortgages, a lot of times they're first-time home buyers, but not exclusively. It was about 2.5 years ago when we were invited to start some conversations about how we could use our financing tools available to us to support weatherization. We know you've heard about the great work that the WAP program does for folks who are very low income, under 80% of median, but there still was a need for incentives and financing support for folks who are just over that threshold, who are earning somewhere between 80 and 120% of median. And so there was a state appropriation for this, some extra money to EVT for incentives, some to VHFA to support this financing work. And the legislature encouraged us to look at a tariff on bill solution. We've heard of this. You all have heard of this in municipalities, counties, electric companies in other parts of the country. But the challenge was, could we develop a statewide tariff on bill solution that was uniform across utilities, as well as providing some of the benefits of on bill finance? And there's too many words on this slide, but you're going to get a copy of it. It is the idea, and the reason I think the legislature challenged us all to work together to look at an on-bill solution was because of some of these challenges that we've long known are in effect, especially for this, do I call it middle income, but this income group that we're talking about, which is, it's great when you can get your weatherization for free and there's no out-of-pocket expense. But what do we do for folks who do not have the means to be able to necessarily support this on their own, but still are challenged by the high upfront cost, that out-of-pocket shock, the limit to credit, the long payback periods, and the fact that we have the split incentive, which is very real to housers like me. You probably don't care a lot about the timeline, but I'll just say that it took a while to figure this out. It was a great idea, and there was a reason we hadn't done it yet in Vermont, and that's because it was not as easy as it sounds in a quick 5-minute presentation. It was very detailed, actually involved quite more lawyers than I realized. So let me explain what we've done. What we've done is created a program where the 3 EEUs in the state are the program administrators. They are critical to this program. They are usually the first point of contact with consumers, and we didn't want to mess with that good system that's already in place. And so customers will reach out to the 3 EEUs for an initial screening. They'd get an energy audit, and should the screening tool prove that the energy savings would be in excess of any repayment through this program, then they would qualify for the WRAP program. So I'm jumping all around because I know you're short on time, but I'll say that the tariff that has been filed by different utilities, I'll say who they are in a second. The tariffs are all pretty much identical, and they do require that customers be able, that the screening tool ensures that if the weatherization investments are made in the home, that the customer should theoretically enjoy at least 10% savings, and that should pay for the WRAP charge that would be on their utility bill. So what happens is the customer gets the energy audit, the contractor goes out and figures out the measures and the savings. It's the program administrator, it's the EEUs who are determining if it meets that savings target and what incentives folks may be eligible for. And once the customer approves, the contractor, the administrator, once approved by the customer and the administrator, the contractor does the work. VHFA pays for the weatherization work upfront. So that's how we overcome that hurdle. At no point, we do ask about income because they have to, fall within the program, but we're not looking at income as a way of underwriting them from a financing perspective. We're not looking at their assets, their credit score, anything like that. We're really underwriting the home, and we're looking at the home to see if that's a good investment. And frankly, this is ironic for a financing agency to say, but the worse it looks, the better the financing it is, because the more of an energy hog you have in your home, the more likely you're going to be able to save a lot of money, which means pay this financing agreement back, which as a lender is important. And so what happens is the work we pay for that contracting work upfront, the work gets done, and then the distribution utility, or I should say just the utility, because VGS is in there as well, that the customer starts paying this back on their bill. And then again, from my financing terms, in some ways it means that the utility becomes what I would refer to them as my loan servicer. They're servicing that loan month to month. They're answering those questions, making those payments. And in the background, that utility is turning to VHFA, and we are keeping track of how much the customer owes and what the total amount is and all that. So we are just now launching this program. You can see that the Burlington Electric Department, GMP, Vermont Electric Co-op, and Ludlow Electric and VGS are all currently set up. They all have approved PUC tariffs. We welcome more partners in this program. We are not stopping here. We are not satisfied that we don't have 100% of the state covered, but we can appreciate that working with 5 new utilities on a brand new program is plenty of work right now. And so we look forward to having some successful case studies before we go out to more utilities and try to really drum up more interest. But that is our plan, is to get to fully statewide. We are estimating that we can right now serve about 1,000 customers with the financial support we got through the state. That changes daily as costs go up. One can imagine that the higher the costs are, the fewer people we may be able to serve. So that's a rough estimate. As Kelly noted, the congressionally directed spending through Senator Leahy on that Clean Heat Homes program may provide some more financing support to expand this number, as well as other things we're looking at. Eventually, here are some of the things you can expect for the future. Here's the vision. Some of this is the vision according to Mora, so take it with a grain of salt, but some of it is definitely supported by what we've heard from others. One, very clear right now, this is available to rental properties if there are 4 or fewer units and there's 1 meter for the property. And that's because the Public Service Department was advising about consumer protections, and that it is actually more complicated than I realized to, I thought you could take a multifamily building and look at the square footage and have some kind of proportionate savings estimates as well as cost estimates. Turns out to really protect customers, it's not that simple, because you have to think about the heating of a home and who's benefiting and where the unit is in the home and how many windows and things like that. But we are not giving up on that goal. And once we have a few more wrap customers and get kind of used to the system of this program, I think that we'll turn our attention to trying to crack that nut next. I think that there are other uses of on-bill finance. The Clean Heat Homes program through the Leahy earmark definitely included panel upgrades, electrical panel upgrades. I hear more conversations about other things that people want to include in on-bill finance, especially as I listen in to the Affordable Heating Act conversations at the State House. I'm cautiously optimistic that we may be able to do other things. So I welcome feedback about other ideas about that. But eventually the reason VHFA, and this will be my last point, the reason we were asked to participate was through an EAN sponsored campaign of trying to bring weatherization to scale, and that we knew that it was not going to be public funds alone that got us to 120,000 homes weatherized in the state. There needs to be public and private partnership here. And that's what VHFA does. That's how we finance all of our traditional, our 50 years of residential lending has been based on the fact that we go out to the bond market. We issue bonds, usually tax exempt, good cheap bonds, and we get investors to invest in VHFA. And in doing so, we turn around and use that capital and we lend it out to others. And we see there's a real opportunity to build up a portfolio of these type of financing agreements. And once we have a good portfolio, you can think of that as a bit of equity that we would have. That will make us look good to Wall Street and the rating agencies and the folks who would help us sell these future bonds. And we could look at the payment history. We could look at the interest, and we could convince everyone that we have a year, 2 or 3, worth of a good business process here that we've built up before we go to Wall Street and start thinking about bonding for this. There would be other really sticky widget questions we have to answer before we get to that point. The biggest one of them is that there is no on-bill finance program that we can find in the country that protects customers from the risk of disconnect, except in Vermont. That was one of the compromises made because we had state funding. We said that this would not be a disconnectable, not paying your wrap charge specifically would not be eligible for disconnect. That is a great way to protect consumers. It might make the cost of someday us going to the bond market may make it cost prohibitive for us to access that market because frankly, investors would want to know that they had that kind of protection. And this gets complicated because we really are looking at policy trade-offs here between the consumer and the financing that may be available. So that's not the problem for us to tackle today, but these are some of the things that we're thinking about as we think about bringing this fully statewide and growing it and building on what we've learned and the agreements we have and these partnerships. I'm very excited to now join you. And I used to refer to many of you affectionately as energy nerds. And now I can say that I feel like I'm becoming one. And so I really look forward to continuing the partnership and working with this sector in this way. And so hopefully, I don't know, y'all have my email, or it's mcollins@vhfa.org. And I welcome further conversations about what y'all want out of partnerships like this.
Thank you, Maura. Really appreciate the presentation and carving out the time today. Those last couple of points you made are really pretty critical in terms of, one, creating the opportunity for sustainable programs. I think that was the whole idea, right? Having self-sustaining programs here, and then also highlighting some of those policy concerns of, where this is offered in South Carolina, they don't have the types of consumer protections that we have here in Vermont, and there's trade-offs that in everything, I guess, but that we really need to consider closely. But any questions for Maura from the committee or the public? Don't see any. I'm really excited to see how this plays out. I was involved a little bit in the early stages, so hopefully it is really a success. I know we're a little behind schedule, but I do want to take 5 minutes just to highlight the workforce issues that everybody brought up and see if there's I know there's been some studies and some funding over the last couple of years directed towards trying to address workforce issues. I think there's a lot of different ideas on how it could be addressed, but I'm not sure if any of our implementers want to kind of expound upon what they were saying, or if any others have comments on just what the challenges are. And I'll say one other thing in just that, and it's a question, is does workforce availability really limit what is possible? We have this 120,000 goal, 90,000 new. in the cap. And is that even technically possible, given the big ramp up that we have now and the challenges we're seeing? You know, is it time to say, hey, we want to do as much as we can, but like we should be realistic here. We're not going to get 90,000. I don't know the answer to that question, but maybe you all do.
Well, yeah, go ahead, Kelly. No, you go.
You sure? I was just going to say, I mean, I think it's a really complex system that we're trying to operate in right now. So, you know, for example, historically, if Efficiency Vermont's funding went down, but the weatherization agencies, you know, were in a good place, they could leverage home performance contractors as subs, right, to help augment workforce constraints that they're facing. Here, I think it's the first time I've seen it be this bad across all of the programs. And I wanted to note, you know, a couple other things that from our perspective, you know, could be feeding into this is there's a broader just dearth of folks in the trades, right? And so we know that there are home performance contractors who, you know, sometimes they'll partner with developers and they will weatherize new homes that are being built. Those projects are easier to do, and they could be more lucrative than doing a standard weatherization project. So we're really trying to dig in with our contractor network and understand, you know, are there other market forces that are pulling them away from the core work that needs to happen for our programs? But it's a trade-off because there's other stuff you probably want them doing too, that you know, that has a broader impact on the state. So I just wanted to note that. And Sarah, I think you probably have more direct market intel because you guys have so much such a close relationship with the weatherization agencies and a better sense of where they're at with hiring. For our program, it's a patchwork. We have literally 2-person shops and we have large contractors who participate. So I try not to make too many blanket statements about where they're at.
Yeah, Kelly, I thank you. I mean, I just to say, again, our program mostly is what's called a crew-based program, right? Which is where 5 out of 6 agencies just employ people that actually go out and do the work. They do use subs. We have a couple, we were on a call with the directors this morning. A couple agencies that are working with subs right now that are like, well, we can work with you for 6 months, but then EVT's pushing out new incentives, so we'll have to let you go. So there's an exact example of what Kelly is saying in terms of the landscape that we're operating in. And I do think, you know, we're pushing them to hire as quickly as they can, but it can't go without saying that it's not just about having warm bodies. You need qualified, skilled people to do this work, or you don't actually achieve the energy savings. Sloppy weatherization work doesn't actually achieve any energy savings. So that's really a key piece of this. So it's really about a trained, qualified workforce. We invest a lot in training and technical assistance in our program itself. So I do think, TJ, back to your point, like, can we get it done? Is it realistic? I'm not sure that it is. I mean, I think we still see it as like a moonshot and we're going for it. But, you know, we've been honest all along the way that we're not sure that we can accomplish these goals. And it keeps a lot of people up at night. So that's where we're at. I would say also in terms of training, and Kelly made mention of it, I didn't even mention it. Thanks, Kelly, that we're working on something called a Weatherization Training Center. What is that? We got funding from the Department of Energy to spend some time doing some planning and business planning and outreach and engagement. Our program in particular has need to send people to an accredited training center for certain kinds of training and certification. Right now, they have to go to New York State. We think that there's opportunity to do that in Vermont. And the other main goal of the funding from DOE around planning is that we really, in order to grow this workforce, we really need to diversify our workforce. And that has to be front and center for us. And that means tackling some pretty big challenges. Vermont Works for Women just put out a really great report on what it means to think about gender and equity in the trades. I think they've got a lot of great things for us to learn from. So we the goal is to do not just sort of launch a training center to then have it fail in a couple of years, but to really launch a training center that tries to do this work differently in Vermont, can serve the whole field, is not just a singular facility, but can act as a collaborative infrastructure for weatherization training in the state of Vermont, and that at its core from the beginning really seeks to create a governance structure and a way of doing work that really does aim to diversify who's in this field. So that work, we've been anxious to start it, but our DOE funding hasn't kicked in for that yet. Hopefully this spring we'll be kicking off with a steering committee, and EVT is our key partner in that work with us, as is Vermont Adult Learning, and Vermont Works for Women, and Vermont Technical College, and or Vermont State Colleges, and forgetting somebody else, Resource, and some other key partners. So if there's others, and EAN, and Cara's been great and is acting as a liaison with that project with EAN's work on climate workforce in general, and the group that's working on that to try and leverage some of the outreach work that's happening there. So that's sort of a general update on that project, but I'm hopeful that it's gonna create the super highway that we need for training in an ongoing way.
Well, thanks to you both for furthering the conversation there on workforce. And I think that kind of tees up, I think all of today is really just kind of leveling up everybody to understand what's going on and kind of teeing up these conversations for the future, and where this committee and the Climate Council can think about how to move forward. Christine, a comment?
Yeah, thank you to all of you. And I have a sort of slightly different question that's more directed at, I think, maybe the climate office within ANR, and bringing this back to goals set in the climate action plan. I'm wondering, I'm not deft enough to put all these numbers together right now while I'm listening, and then compare it to the goals in the CAP and say, okay, so now we know that these providers and funders of WX and EE are now projecting X number of units per year over the next bundle of years. How do those numbers compare when you put them all together to what we believed we would need to achieve in order to meet the CAP? And I know that's not a super hard exercise to do, but I could do it after this call myself, but I'm actually wondering at a more systemic systems level, if there is any one human being within the climate ecosystem within ANR whose job it is or will be to be doing that type of tracking. This is a sort of easy one, but how are we doing programmatically and from implementation perspectives in Vermont year by year compared to what we knew we needed to be doing in the CAP? Is there anyone who has that job assigned to them now? And if not, will there be? And maybe there's no one on this call that can answer that.
Well, I saw Jane pointing at Colin over there, but I will say before we hand it over to Colin that as part of the thermal programs for the efficiency utilities, the Public Utility Commission had set had some responsibilities related to the previous goal of 80,000 homes by 2020. And they delegated, or I'm not sure if we asked for it, and they agreed, the responsibility to kind of track our progress towards those goals. Finding out and kind of looking at the numbers here this week that things are like slightly off, but we have tracked those over the years and done a report to the commission on how many units were done by each implementer, and how much savings there were on average by each implementer. And so I think we'll work with ANR as we get into the measurement and tracking portion of kind of what the Climate Office's responsibility is to see where that responsibility lies. We don't have that formal responsibility anymore, but I wouldn't have expected us to stop doing it, if nobody else was going to do it. But we'll I think we'll coordinate that from the department and the Climate Action Office. And Jane and Colin and Megan, you can correct me if I'm wrong there.
No, that's all makes a lot of sense. And yeah, Colin, for the benefit of everyone on this call, his title in the Climate Action Office is Climate Change Data and Progress Analyst. And so in addition to managing the greenhouse gas inventory, the Climate Action Office will be responsible for building a measuring and tracking progress tool. And that RFP should go live in the next month or so. And that will be this core component of the work that the Climate Office does over time to both track progress for the sake of meeting our emissions reductions, but also to speak to the effectiveness of policies and strategies from the Climate Action Plan and how they're being deployed, and communication with the public as a key component of demonstrating the work that we are all doing in a substantive and cohesive way. And then just one note, like specifically about all of the work that our partners just spoke to in this space is that folks will be interested in is that one of the deliverables of the buildings and thermal contract that is due in the coming month to 6 weeks is really around updating our business as usual model to reflect the impacts of the federal funding that's in place right now, as well as other impactful legislation and advancement of rules, adoption, and other things that show where we are on course between now and 2030 to meet our emissions reductions and further refine the gap that we still need to close with further programs and policies. So that's something that will be, I think, really informative to the conversation in the coming months, having that updated model.
Thanks, Jane. So once again, I'd like to thank everybody for their presentations. I know Sarah had to go, but I think that was really informative and a good grounding of where we are since the Climate Action Plan went forward, and a lot for us to think about and how we shape things going forward. I know we only have less than 20 minutes here for the rest of the agenda, so maybe I didn't do my job as facilitator all that well today, but I think it was important to kind of hear from the folks while we had them. I'd like to move to a brief update for folks on where A&R and the department are with the thermal sector analysis, the contract with Energy Futures Group, and I think I'm going to ask either Jane or Brian to provide that update.
I'm happy to do it, but really, Brian, you're better suited if you'd prefer.
Sure. Good afternoon, everybody. I will be brief to try and recover your dignity, TJ. So we have we've engaged EFG and some subcontractors to do this broad analysis of options for reducing emissions in the buildings thermal energy sector. We've gone through a kickoff meeting with them. We've moved through a qualitative analysis of a number of options, some of which were in the contract and the RFP that I think many of you are already familiar with. Then a few more. We had a meeting with the task group to review that draft report and have come to agreement on a list of 5 options to forward for quantitative assessment that's going to be based on the LEAP tool that was used for the Pathways report. The group is moving ahead with recalibrating that LEAP tool now, so updating it from all the things that are different since the last update 2 years ago, in particular IIJA and IRA, also some changes in how fuel use is allocated amongst particular residences and commercial buildings, some issues about the way what he was forecast to come into play and what that would mean as far as costs and emissions changes, a whole list of other updates that they're going to make. So we had a good meeting with them. We'll be finalizing the qualitative assessment, hopefully sometime this week. We'll be meeting with the task group in early March. I will be in touch with task group members to talk about, for the options that we're forwarding, we have to parameterize all of them. So for example, one of the options, of course, is the clean heat standards that's being considered by the legislature right now, S5. In order for them to model it, they need to basically do all the design work, or we need to make assumptions about design work that is going to be actually a part of the Public Service, the Public Utilities Commission process. We're going to need to do that for all of the options. And we'll be working internally with our friends from PSD and the task group on that. And then finally, because I see my friend Andrea, we're also planning to have a meeting of their contractor, Cambridge Systematics, who's working on their carbon reduction strategy, and our contractor, to have just have a conversation about trying to align assumptions and or outcomes as we study both of these sectors separately, but providing the contractors and the project teams an opportunity to interact and identify places where we can make these products work together, be complementary to each other. So all coming attraction. We are on schedule for a delivery of a final report that would be right now in late May or early June.
Thank you, Brian. Any questions on the thermal sector work? Jared, go ahead.
Just one thing, and I'm sorry I forgot to bring it up during the last task group meeting, but when we meet again as a task group, Brian, one thing that I think would be really helpful, and I don't know if the broader committee would want this at a future point, I think it would be useful to go over the plan for kind of updates to the LEAP model in the business as usual scenario, so that we can kind of have full transparency on and be able to discuss some of the assumptions behind the projected changes. So I just want to note that, happy to discuss that more offline, but I think that that's a really key piece. I will just state, for instance, that some of these things are much easier to model than others, things that are kind of requirements about number of vehicles provided or performance standards on equipment, things that are more incentive-based that depend on the kind of actions or behaviors of individuals or businesses to take in their relative, how they think about these things, the barriers to uptake, psychological challenges. I mean, there's so many things that go into whether or not an incentive gets used. So I just think that there's a much higher degree of uncertainty around the degree of uptake on some of those things, or they need to be modeled to take into account different elasticities of demand, et cetera. So I just want to make sure that we're having open conversations about those assumptions and how those modeling choices are being made.
Yeah, thanks for that, Jared. We should have the conversation. I think our next cross-sector committee meeting is probably sometime in the middle of March. That's already scheduled. And that's kind of the due date for the business as usual reference case update. And so I'm not sure the timing of that, and I wouldn't want to kind of overemphasize what the a possibility for this committee, if it's at that regular scheduled time, to influence that. It may be more of a task group thing, and as we go along, which has a little more flexibility and nimbleness to meet.
Jay, can I just suggest something real quick?
Yeah, go ahead.
This morning when we met as a climate office and talked about next steps, we specifically spoke about our next meeting with the Buildings and Thermal Task Group would be two-pronged. One would be looking specifically at the hood being open on the LEAP model and the assumptions going into updating the business as usual model as one key component to discuss with the Buildings and Thermal Task Group. And then the second part of that task group meeting being well aligned with also discussing the parameters that we're envisioning for the quantitative analysis. So very much agree with that, Jared. And then also just wanted to note that we thought that that first part of the meeting with the buildings and thermal task group might be better actually to have the conversation also with the transportation task group there, to have one conversation, because we envision the largest updates to that, the business as usual model being both for the transportation sector and the buildings and thermal sector, knowing that there's been a lot of the impact of the IRA, the impact of other federal funding, and the impact of adoption of the rules all will impact the business as usual model. So we sort of wanted to have a transparent, open conversation with both of the task groups present. So stay tuned for us to be setting that up.
Right. So that gets to probably most of the people on this call between those two task groups, but it isn't the cross-sector committee writ large. And I think that was my where I was going with my point. And so if we could talk about how best to make sure that it's kind of open and transparent, how we're doing this, but I think that through the task group or the two task groups may allow more flexibility going forward. Okay, so if there's no more discussion there, let's move on really quickly. I'm sorry, Andrea, to squeeze you quite a bit here on the carbon reduction strategy.
I have a presentation and everything, but I'll fly through it. Can you guys see that? I never know in Zoom if it's sharing.
Yes.
Okay, and you're actually looking at a presentation?
Yes, we are.
Okay, so weird. Okay, yeah, just quickly, Andrea Wright, I'm the Environmental Policy Manager at VTrans, and I'm leading the carbon reduction strategy efforts there. I wanted to provide a presentation because I'm a visual person, and just because it's been a while since we talked about this, so I just wanted to kind of go back to sharing some background. The carbon reduction programs from the IIJA, and it gives us $32 million over 5 years, starting in federal fiscal year 22. And basically just needs to go it funds projects designed to reduce transportation emissions, and within the guidelines is a requirement for states to adopt a carbon reduction strategy. And so I just listed there some of the types of projects that these funds can go to. The objectives are sort of obvious: support the Global Warming Solutions Act requirements to reduce transportation emissions, and also just describe how the carbon reduction program funding will be used within the strategy. The approach that we're taking is two-phased, and the first phase is to develop a methodology to estimate the greenhouse gas emissions from the VTrans capital program. And then the second phase is to develop the carbon reduction strategy. There's several tasks within each of those phases. We have developed a technical committee and an advisory committee. The technical committee has met 4 times now. So definitely way more involved in phase 1, developing that methodology. And then they'll stay involved in phase 2 as that methodology is used to analyze strategies and scenarios that we come up with. And then the advisory committee really just 4 meetings. We just met, started meeting in January, and their main goal is to provide input into the development of the strategy and the scenarios, and like what level of detail those things go into, and what should be involved in each of the scenarios. So this is our project schedule. We basically have completed up to 3, and now in the scenario development and analysis, and then getting into providing recommendations through the carbon reduction strategy. And we expect our first draft of that to be done midsummer. And just some detail of what we've completed is we've got the methodology done. These are sort of some of the tools that we use. We went over a bunch of different tools with the technical committee to decide which tools to use. But really, for the most part of it, is a customized tool that the consultant came up with to look at our different types of projects and give them a greenhouse gas reduction sort of score or potential depending on where they are. So if they're rural or urban, they get a different score on that. And there's quite a calculation that goes into that tool. I won't go into details on that because we don't have time. And then we're just looking at how that tool was used to evaluate the capital program and what came out of that. And not surprisingly, we're seeing that as our current program stands, we're not seeing huge reductions in greenhouse gases from what we have planned right now. I think we knew that all along. We've seen, some states, depending on what types of programs they have, might get like 2 to 8%, but it's not going to be a huge number that we see coming out of these programs. Let's see. And then, and just looking at what are the implications of our program. So
I think we lost you, Andrea, or at least I did.
Yeah, we lost her too.
Yeah.
Yep.
I wondered if it was me, but yep.
The Zoom couldn't handle the compressed speed at which she was talking and trying to get through all this, I guess. So I think it was kind of unfair for the carbon reduction strategy to have only 5 minutes here anyway. I think maybe we can try and tee this up again, but folks will at least have the slides available to look at them and can reach out to Andrea to kind of ask any questions. I think, we could talk about it, whether folks are interested in carbon reduction strategy as a topic for the next meeting. It sounds like we'll probably have more updates. Well, let me stop. I saw a couple people nodding as maybe yes, that would be a good thing to update on. I think we could have some updates again on the thermal sector analysis that maybe go a little more in depth, and we can gauge that based on how many folks are attending from the task group, the task group meetings on the thermal sector analysis. Hey, Andrea, you're frozen again, actually. No, you're back. So
I'm on my backup internet. I just
you're still a little glitchy, and I feel like it wasn't what I was just saying is it wasn't really fair for us to ask you to kind of speed through that presentation, and that maybe we could tee this up again for next time to have a little more time to really go through it and folks could understand what's going on. And so the third thing, I guess, would be any other updates or consideration of any other presentations that folks want. We talked a lot about the demand side and weatherization today. We could have other technologies discussion on, heat pumps or other, water heaters, other technologies, or we could look at the supply side of the thermal sector as well. And folks could comment really quickly now or just send me an email if they're, have ideas for how to structure the next one. Thermal sector might be, the supply side might be something interesting as, given all the conversations going on at the State House and how we move forward, looking at biofuels, alternative supplies, that could be interesting, but so with those 3 things, I think we'll kind of tee those up for next time. And apologies to squeeze the end of the agenda today. And I'll restart my computer before this meeting next time, so my camera can be on. And with that, I'm gonna, I think, unless anybody has any other comments, we can kind of come to an abrupt halt to this meeting today. Thank you all for the discussion, and even though they're not here anymore, thank you to the presenters for what they shared. It was really helpful. All right, have a good afternoon, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, TJ. Bye-bye.